Under the indifferent gaze of a fractured moon, the collar of iron thorns bit into Ilara's neck like the teeth of forgotten gods, marking her not as kin, but as prey. The wind howled through the jagged peaks of the Frostfang Mountains, carrying the scent of pine resin and distant blood, as if the very air mourned her fall. Ilara stumbled forward, her bare feet sinking into the snow that clung to the world like a shroud. Each step was a betrayal of her body, the cold seeping into her bones, whispering promises of numbness that she both craved and feared. She had been Omega once, cherished in the shadowed halls of the Silverclaw Pack, her gentle touch a balm to the warrior's wounds. But whispers of disloyalty, fabricated by a rival's envy, had twisted her into a rogue, a curse to be cast out. The collar was their final judgment, forged in the Pack's ancient forge under the watchful eyes of the elders. Its thorns, etched with runes of banishment, drew thin lines of blood that froze into crimson icicles against her pale skin. It weighed heavier than any chain, a symbol of her shattered worth, humming with a cruel magic that dulled her senses, muting the instinctive pull of the pack bond that once sang in her veins. She touched it tentatively, fingers trembling, and felt the pulse of her own heartbeat echoing against the metal, a solitary rhythm in the vast silence of exile. Night had fallen swiftly in these heights, the sky a velvet abyss pierced by stars that seemed to judge her from afar. The moon, her namesake's cruel twin, hung low, its light spilling over the snow in silvery waves that turned the landscape into a frozen tapestry of despair. Ilara's breath came in ragged clouds, her dark hair matted with frost, whipping across her face like accusing fingers. She remembered the trial in the great hall, the firelight flickering on the faces of those she had called family, the Alpha's voice, cold as the blade he had not wielded, declaring her rogue. "She carries the shadow of betrayal," he had said, his eyes avoiding hers. No trial of claws or fang, just the collar, snapped shut with a finality that echoed like thunder in her soul. Now the forest loomed ahead, a labyrinth of ancient evergreens bowed under the weight of winter's wrath. Weaves echoed faintly from the valleys below, wolves calling to their own, a chorus that excluded her utterly. Ilara's legs burned, but she pressed on, driven by the primal urge to survive, even as despair clawed at her chest. What was an Omega without her pack? A whisper in the wind, destined to fade. Her mind replayed the faces: Lyra, her closest sister, who had turned away; Thorn, the beta who had forged the lies to claim her place; and the Alpha, stoic and unyielding, his rejection a wound deeper than the thorns. She collapsed against a boulder, its surface slick with ice, and curled into herself, the collar pressing harder as she gasped for air. The cold was a living thing now, wrapping around her like a lover's embrace turned suffocating. Tears froze on her lashes, and in that moment she felt the stirrings of something ancient within. A faint glow, like moonlight on water, buried deep in her spirit. The Deusa's gift, they had called it once, the hidden sight of the Pathfinder, able to trace paths through shadow and storm. But it had been dismissed as weakness, a fanciful tale for Omegas to cling to in their subservience. A distant howl pierced the night, closer this time, sending a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the frost. Was it pursuit? The Pack's hunters, ensuring the rogue did not linger too near their borders? Or something wilder, drawn by the scent of her blood? Ilara forced herself up, her hands scraping against the snow, unearthing a small, frost-bitten rose that somehow bloomed defiant amid the white desolation. Its petals, edged in red like her wounds, seemed to pulse with a quiet defiance. She tucked it into the collar's edge, a fragile talisman against the encroaching dark. The path descended into a ravine, where the wind's voice grew into a lament, swirling flakes around her like spectral dancers. Her thoughts turned inward, to the philosophy etched in the Pack's lore. What is strength, if not the will to endure the breaking? But endurance felt like a lie now, a cruel jest from the moon above. She was no queen, no savior, just a shadow fleeing the light she had once illuminated. As the ravine narrowed, shadows deepened, and Alara sensed eyes upon her, not the moon's, but something earthly, predatory. A figure in the tree line, cloaked in midnight fur, its breath visible in the chill. Friend or foe? Her heart pounded, the collar's thorns drawing fresh blood that trickled warm down her collarbone, staining the snow at her feet. In that blood, under the moon's unblinking eye, she glimpsed a possibility. Not redemption, but survival. And in survival, perhaps the first thread of a destiny unwritten. The figure moved, silent as falling snow, and Alara's world narrowed to the rhythm of her pulse, the bite of iron and the unyielding call of the wild night. The figure emerged from the tree line like a specter woven from the night itself, his form cutting through the swirling snow with a predator's grace that made Alara's breath catch in her throat. He was tall, broader than the shadows that clung to him, his cloak of midnight fur dusted with frost, hood drawn low over a face etched by lines of weariness and something deeper, guilt perhaps, or the weight of a crown too heavy for one's soul. Blood scented the air, sharp and metallic, mingling with the pine and her own drying wounds, drawing her gaze to the gash across his forearm, where crimson seeped through a hasty bandage of torn leather. Alara froze against the ravine's icy wall, her fingers instinctively clutching the frost-bitten rose tucked into the collar's thorns. Its petals, fragile as forgotten promises, brushed her skin, a fleeting warmth against the iron's bite. Fear coiled in her gut, instinctive and raw, urging her to flee, but curiosity rooted her in place. Who was he? Not one of her pack's hunters. Their scents were familiar, laced with the smoke of hearth fires and the musk of loyalty. This stranger carried the wilder tang of distant realms, of battles fought under foreign moons, and beneath it all, a faint echo of alpha power, restrained yet undeniable, like thunder held at bay. He paused a dozen paces away, his breath clouding the air in measured huffs, golden eyes gleaming from the hood's shadow, eyes that held the fire of ancient forges, now dimmed by sorrow. Rogue, he murmured, the word not a condemnation, but a question, laced with a gravelly timbre that vibrated through the cold, stirring something primal in her chest. The collar hummed faintly, its runes pulsing as if recognizing kinship in his presence, but Alara shoved the sensation down, rationalizing it as delirium from the chill. Alphas did not speak to outcasts, they ended them. She straightened, though her legs trembled, the snow crunching under her weight like brittle bones. "Leave me," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the wind's relentless assault. But her eyes betrayed her, darting to his wound, assessing as if her omega instincts could not be fully silenced. Blood called to her, not for hunger, but for the urge to mend, a gift she had once wielded in the pack's halls, binding gashes with herbs and quiet words. Now it felt like a curse, drawing her toward danger. He tilted his head, studying her as one might a wounded doe in a snare. His gaze lingering on the collar with a flicker of recognition that twisted her stomach. That mark. Silverclaw's doing? His tone carried no judgment, only a weary empathy that unnerved her more than threats would have. He took a step closer, and the wind shifted, carrying his scent fully to her. Earth and storm, laced with the faint copper of his blood and something sweeter, like embers banked in snow. It pulled at her, instinctive, a thread of connection she denied with every fiber of her being. He was alpha. She was rogue. There could be no bridge across that chasm. Alara backed away, her heel slipping on ice, sending her sprawling into the snow. Pain lanced through her palms as thorns from hidden brambles drew fresh blood, mirroring his own. He was upon her in an instant, not with claws extended, but with a hand outstretched, gloved in worn leather scarred by old battles. "Easy," he said, voice low, as if calming a skittish wolf. Up close, she saw the truth of him, a king in exile, his jaw shadowed with stubble, a circlet of tarnished silver half hidden beneath his hood, etched with runes of a northern realm long sundered by war. King Thornvald of the Iron Veil Pack, whispered legends said, marked by the guilt of a betrayal that had cost him his throne, his brother's blood on his hands, or so the tales spun. She slapped his hand away, surging to her feet with a snarl that surprised even her. I need no pity from wanderers. But her eyes betrayed her again, tracing the line of his scar, a jagged line from temple to jaw, silvered by time, glowing faintly under the moon's gaze. It mirrored her own hidden wounds, the ones the collar could not touch. Fear warred with curiosity. What alpha fled into these forsaken heights, bleeding and alone? Pursued, like her? The thought ignited a spark of reluctant kinship, quickly doused by reason. Trust was a luxury for the pack-bound, not the collared. Thornvald withdrew his hand, but did not retreat, his golden eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that stripped away the night's veils. Nor do I offer it, but the hunters are close. I hear their howls on the wind. Silverclaw's borders bleed into my path. He glanced toward the ravine's mouth, where distant weavos rose like a dirge, confirming his words. The moon above watched impassively, its light fracturing on the snow, casting their shadows long and entwined, as if the Deusa herself wove fates in silver threads. Ilara's heart raced, the rose's petals crumbling slightly in her grip, releasing a faint, icy fragrance that cut through the blood scent. Instinct screamed to run alone, to deny this pull that felt too much like destiny's cruel jest. Yet curiosity held her, whispering of shared exile, of wounds that might bind rather than break. Why help a rogue? She demanded, her voice a fragile thread in the wind's howl. Because every shadow carries light, he replied, his words heavy with the philosophy of fallen kings. And tonight, ours may need to burn together. He extended his hand once more, not as savior, but as equal in the storm, a choice she resisted, even as the first flakes of a brewing blizzard stung her skin. The howls grew nearer, a chorus of pursuit that drowned the silence, forcing her hand. With a curse born of fear and reluctant need, Ilara clasped his forearm, their blood mingling on leather and skin, warm against the encroaching cold. The connection sparked, instinctive and denied. A flame kindled in the heart of winter's grip. As they plunged deeper into the ravine, the rose fell from her fingers, its red heart vanishing into the snow, a symbol of what might bloom or wither in the refuge ahead. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments of the night they find you. The ravine twisted like a serpent's spine, its walls rising sheer and unforgiving, choked with ice that gleamed under the moon's fractured light. Ilara's hand burned where it gripped Thornvald's forearm, the warmth of his skin seeping through the leather like a forbidden ember against her frost-numbed fingers. Their mingled blood slicked the contact, a visceral tie that pulsed with each hurried step, drawing her deeper into the unknown. The howls behind them swelled into a frenzy, Silverclaw's hunters closing the gap, their voices a tapestry of rage and pack loyalty that clawed at her soul. She was no longer one of them. She was the stain they sought to erase. Thornevald led without words, his body a shield against the wind that lashed like whips, flinging snow into their faces. His wound wept steadily now, the scent of it sharp in her nostrils, mingling with the metallic tang of her collar's thorns. Empathy stirred unbidden in her chest, a traitorous pull. Omega instincts whispering to staunch the flow, to wrap his arm in whatever scraps of cloth she could tear from her tattered shift. But she resisted, rationalizing it as survival's demand, not the spark of something more. He was a stranger, an alpha whose golden eyes held shadows she dared not name. Trust him, and the collar's curse might tighten further, binding her to another illusion of belonging. They stumbled into a cleft in the rock face, a narrow fissure hidden by overhanging icicles that dripped like frozen tears. Thornevald pressed her inside first, his hand lingering a fraction too long on her back, steadying her as the ground sloped into darkness. The space opened into a shallow cave, its floor carpeted in drifted snow, walls veined with quartz that caught the moonlight in silvery veins, as if the Dusa had etched her sorrow into the stone. A faint trickle of water echoed from deeper within, and the air hung heavy with the musk of earth, long undisturbed. He barred the entrance with his body, listening, his breath ragged but controlled, the rise and fall of his chest, a rhythm that synced unwittingly with her own. Alara sank against the far wall, her knees buckling, the collar's weight dragging at her neck like an anchor. The thorns had reopened with the flight, fresh blood trickling warm down her chest, staining the snow at her feet in dark blooms. She watched him through the veil of her lashes, curiosity warring with the fear that coiled in her belly like a trapped wolf. Who was this king in rags, fleeing as she did? His cloak, edged in frayed silver thread, whispered of lost thrones, and the scar on his jaw caught the dim light, a map of old betrayals. Guilt shadowed his features, not the cold authority of her former alpha, but a melancholy depth that mirrored her own fractured spirit. What wound did he carry, heavier than his blade? The howls peaked outside, a cacophony that shook loose powder from the ceiling, and shadows flickered at the cleft's mouth, hunters, their eyes glowing amber in the night. One snarled a challenge, the sound guttural, laced with the pack's ancient fury. Thornevald's hand went to the hilt of his sword, drawn with a whisper of steel on leather, his stance unyielding as the mountain itself. "Stay low," he murmured to her, voice a low growl that vibrated through the cave, stirring the air between them. Alara nodded, though pride burned in her throat. She was no helpless pup. Yet as the first hunter lunged, claws scraping stone, she felt the instinctive surge. The Pathfinder's gift flickering to life, a haze of silver vision overlaying the dark, revealing the ravine's hidden paths, the weak points in the ice above. She didn't think. She acted. "There," she whispered, pointing to a precarious ledge where the frost hung thin. Thornevald followed her gaze, understanding flashing in his eyes, and with a roar that echoed like thunder, he struck, not at the hunter, but at the ice. His sword shattered the shelf, sending a cascade of jagged shards and snow tumbling down, burying the pursuers in a white avalanche that muffled their cries. The cave entrance sealed partially, a barrier of frozen debris that bought them breath, if not safety. Panting, he sheathed his blade and turned to her, the adrenaline fading to reveal the raw edge of his exhaustion. "You saw it," he said. Not a question, but a revelation, his golden eyes searching hers in the dim glow. Alara looked away, the collar humming against her skin as if alive to the moment. The gift had stirred, unbidden, a thread of destiny she had long buried under layers of rejection. Empathy bloomed then, reluctant and warm, as she saw the mirror in him, the rogue king, haunted by choices that had sundered his pack, his brother's blood, a ghost that followed him into exile. He knelt before her, not in dominance but equality, unwrapping the sodden bandage on his arm to reveal the gash, deep and angry, pulsing with the rhythm of unspoken regrets. "Let me," she said softly, the words escaping before reason could cage them. Her hands, trembling but sure, tore a strip from her shift, the fabric whispering against her skin like a shed skin. She pressed it to his wound, the warmth of his blood meeting hers in a shared heat that defied the cave's chill. The air thickened with the scent of pine sap from the walls, mingling with their mingled essences, earth and storm, blood and frost. As she bound the injury, Her fingers brushed the scar on his jaw, tracing its silvered path, and he did not pull away. Instead, his hand covered hers, gentle, the touch igniting a bond that felt like roots seeking soil in barren ground. "Why do you run?" she asked, voice barely above the drip of melting ice, curiosity yielding to the need to understand. His eyes darkened, the weight of his crown visible in the lines around them. "A brother's betrayal. Or mine," he replied, the confession heavy as the snow outside. "I chose duty over blood, and the Deusa cursed me with guilt that no throne can lift. The iron veil hunts me still, calling me traitor." The words hung between them, a bridge of shared exile, turning fear into fragile trust. Elara felt the collar's thorns ease, just a fraction, as if the iron recognized the forging of something new. Not love, not yet, but a tether born of necessity and the quiet fire of empathy. Outside, the wind mourned the fallen hunters, weavos fading into the night. But within the cave, silence wrapped them like a cloak. The moon's light filtered through cracks in the ice, casting their forms in ethereal silver, and in that glow, Elara glimpsed the philosophy of their kind. What is refuge, if not two wounds weaving into one strength? The frostbitten rose's memory lingered in her mind, its red heart a promise of what might thaw in the heart of winter's hold. Yet as Thornevald's gaze held hers, warm and unyielding, she resisted the pull, rationalizing the bond as mere survival. But deep within, where the Pathfinder's light flickered, she knew, in protecting him, she had begun to shelter her own shattered soul. The cave's quartz veins pulsed with the moon's borrowed light, casting fractured patterns across Thornevald's face like the shards of a broken vow. Alara's hand lingered beneath his, the binding cloth around his wound, now a fragile seal against the blood that sought to spill secrets neither was ready to voice. The air between them hummed, thick with the scent of damp stone and the faint, metallic tang of their shared essence, as if the Deusa herself breathed life into the silence. She withdrew slowly, her fingers trailing the edge of his scar, feeling the raised tissue warm under her touch, a map of guilt etched deeper than any blade could carve. Empathy had woven its thread, turning the cave from mere shelter into a confessional, but trust remained a wild thing, skittish and half-formed. Thornevald shifted, his golden eyes reflecting the silver glow, holding hers with a quiet intensity that stirred the embers of curiosity she had tried to bury. "That sight of yours," he said, voice low as the distant drip of melting ice. "It's no common gift. The Pathfinder's mark. Legends speak of it in the old scrolls, a vision that pierces the veil between paths untaken." He leaned closer, not invading, but bridging the space with the weight of his words, his breath warm against the chill that clung to her skin. Alara's pulse quickened, the collar's thorns pricking anew, a reminder of the pack's dismissal, her fancy as weakness, unfit for an Omega's role. Yet here, in this hidden hollow, it had saved them, unveiling the avalanche's fragile perch like a whisper from the stars. She turned her gaze to the cave's depths, where shadows pooled like spilled ink, rationalizing the surge as adrenaline's echo. "It's nothing," she murmured, though the lie tasted bitter on her tongue, mingling with the copper of her own drying blood. The wind outside had stilled, leaving only the muffled howls of the storm's aftermath, a lull that pressed upon them like an unspoken question. What now? Refuge had bought them time, but exile's shadow loomed, hungry for more than flesh. Thornevald's presence pulled at her, instinctive and resisted, a king's melancholy mirroring her rogue's despair, forging a bond she dared not name. He was no savior, she was no prize. Yet the philosophy of their kind echoed in her mind. What is destiny, if not the light revealed in mutual breaking? As if summoned by her doubt, a tremor rippled through the earth, faint at first, like the mountain's sigh. The quartz walls shimmered, and Alara's vision blurred, the Pathfinder's gift uncoiling from its dormant coil like a serpent rousing from winter's sleep. Silver haze overlaid the dark, transforming the cave into a labyrinth of glowing threads, paths branching like veins of fate, some leading to jagged ends, others winding toward unseen dawns. She gasped, clutching the collar, its runes flaring hot against her throat, drawing a thin rivulet of blood that traced her collarbone like a crimson rune of awakening. The rose's memory bloomed in her mind, its frostbitten petals a defiant red against the white, symbol of wounds that could yet flower. In the haze, she saw him, not the weary exile before her, but Thornvald, as he might have been, crowned in the Iron Vale's great hall, flames roaring in hearths of black stone, his brother's shadow at his side. Then the fracture, blood on marble floors, a betrayal's howl under a blood moon, the king's choice, duty's blade falling, guilt's curse blooming like thorns in his soul. The vision shifted, pulling her deeper, to a temple lunar high in the peaks where moonlight pooled in a basin of ice, revealing a prophecy etched in frost. The collared one shall trace the path of the fallen crown, her sight the key to shatter the iron veil. Alara's breath hitched, the images searing her mind with visceral clarity, the sting of wind-lashed snow, the metallic bite of blood on her lips, the warmth of a hand not her own, clasping hers in union against the storm. She staggered back, the haze receding, leaving her trembling, eyes wide as the cave's entrance cracks let in slivers of moonlight that danced on her bloodied skin. Thornevald rose swiftly, steadying her with hands that gripped her shoulders gently, his touch grounding the whirlwind within. "What did you see?" he demanded, voice laced with urgency, not command, his golden eyes searching hers as if she held the fragments of his shattered realm. The air grew heavier, charged with the scent of ozone and pine, as if the Deuce's breath stirred the quartz to life. Alara met his gaze, the resistance cracking under the weight of revelation. This was no delirium, but truth unveiled, her gift manifesting not as weakness, but as the very thread binding their fates. "You," she whispered, the word heavy with the vision's echo, her voice threading through the silence like a weevo under the moon. "Your crown, lost to betrayal, but not forever. The Iron Veil calls you back through paths hidden in ice and blood, and I—" She faltered, fingers brushing the collar, feeling the thorns yield slightly, as if the iron sensed its purpose, nearing fulfillment. The frostbitten rose's image lingered, its red heart pulsing in her mind's eye, a symbol of her own exile transmuted, rejection's bloom into destiny's guide. Thornevald's face paled, recognition dawning like fire on snow, his scar gleaming silver in the light. He had sought a seer in the wilds, whispers of the Pathfinder drawing him to these mountains, but fate had delivered more, an Omega rogue, collared and broken, whose sight pierced his guilt's veil. "You are the key," he breathed, awe threading his tone, his hands tightening on her shoulders, not in possession, but reverence, the Alpha's power tempered by the King's melancholy. The bond deepened then, empathy forging into something profound, a recognition that her hidden light was the balm to his wound, her path the redemption he had forsaken. Yet doubt clawed at Alara's heart, the philosophy rising unbidden. What is power, if not the choice to wield sight for mercy over vengeance? The howls outside stirred anew, distant but insistent, Silverclaw's remnants or Iron Vale's hunters converging, drawn by blood and fate's inexorable pull. In that moment, under the moon's watchful eye, she glimpsed the trial ahead, not just survival, but the moral crossroads where love might demand sacrifice, turning exile into coronation or ash. The quartz pulsed once more, sealing the vision's echo, and Thornevald pulled her close, their foreheads touching in the silver glow, breaths mingling like storm and calm. Resistance lingered, rationalized as fear, but the gift's manifestation had woven them tighter, her soul's light illuminating his shadowed throne. Outside, the wind rose, carrying the promise of confrontation, but within, a spiritual dilemma bloomed. To embrace this destiny was to risk her fragile freedom, to heal his guilt with her own rebirth, or turn away, letting the paths diverge into eternal winter. Like if you believe rejection can become destiny. The wind clawed at the cave's fractured entrance like the talons of vengeful spirits, hurling snow through the cracks in relentless sheets that stung Ilara's skin like accusations from the past. She pulled away from Thornevald's touch, the warmth of his forehead against hers lingering like a brand. Too intimate for the fragile trust they had forged. The quartz walls, still humming with the echo of her vision, seemed to close in, their silver veins pulsing in rhythm with her racing heart. Outside, the howls had multiplied, not just Silverclaw's remnants, but deeper, guttural calls laced with the iron tang of Ironvale's warriors, converging on this hidden cleft as if fate itself had summoned the confrontation. Blood called to blood, and theirs had spilled enough to draw the wolves of old wounds. Ilara's fingers traced the collar's thorns, now slick with fresh crimson, the iron humming with a malevolent awareness that mirrored her inner turmoil. The Pathfinder's gift had unveiled truths she could not unsee. Thornvald's throne, sundered by his brother's betrayal, his hand stained with the duty that demanded fratricide under a blood moon. And her role, the collared rogue as key, her sight the thread to reweave his realm. But revelation bred dread. What price would destiny exact? Freedom whispered in the wind's lament, a rogue's solitary path through endless snow, unburdened by another's guilt. Yet the bond tugged, instinctive and resisted, his golden eyes holding hers with a plea that echoed her own buried longing for redemption. "We cannot hide forever," Thornevald said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the storm's roar, rising to his feet with the fluid grace of a king unbroken by exile. His scar gleamed silver in the moonlight's shards, a twin to the collar's bite, and he extended a hand not in command, but invitation, equal in the face of judgment. The air thickened with the scent of approaching fur and steel, musk of pack loyalty twisted into hunt. Ilara hesitated, the frostbitten rose's memory blooming in her mind, its red petals defiant against white desolation, a symbol of wounds that could either wither or root into something fierce. She clasped his hand, their mingled blood sealing the pact, warm and visceral against the encroaching cold. Love was no reward here. It was the trial's forge, testing if mercy could temper the blade of war. They emerged into the blizzard's maw, the ravine transformed into a battlefield of swirling white and shadow. Silverclaw's hunters flanked the left, their forms hulking silhouettes with eyes like embers, led by Thorn, the beta who had woven lies to claim her place, his muzzle scarred from old skirmishes, now twisted in triumphant snarl. To the right, Ironvale's vanguard pressed, armored in gray steel, etched with runes of forgotten oaths, their alpha rival at the fore. A hulking figure named Grimoire, Thornevald's cousin, eyes burning with the fire of usurped power, his blade drawn and thirsting for the traitor's blood. The packs clashed in the snow-choked pass, claws rending fur, fangs sinking into flesh, the air alive with weavos that drowned the wind, a symphony of betrayal's harvest. Ilara's vision flared unbidden, silver threads weaving through the chaos, revealing paths of peril and possibility. A ledge crumbling under Grimoire's weight, a hunter's flank exposed to the ravine's drop. But the sight twisted inward, pulling at her past. The great hall of Silverclaw, firelight on faces turned cold, her alpha's voice declaring her rogue as Thorn whispered poison in his ear. "She consorts with shadows," he had lied, his ambition a venom that now bayed for her end. Pain lanced her chest, not from thorns, but memory's bite. Rejection's wound reopened, bleeding into the snow as she fought beside Thornvald, her small form dodging strikes, directing him with urgent whispers born of the gift. Thornvald moved like storm incarnate, his sword a arc of silver death, felling a silver-claw hunter with a strike that sprayed blood across the frost, crimson blooms mirroring the rose's heart. Yet his eyes sought Grimoire, the rival who had twisted his brother's death into a crown of lies, claiming the Iron Veil throne on waves of false accusations. "Brother killer!" Grimoire bellowed, charging through the fray, his blade clashing against Thornvald's in a shower of sparks that lit the snow like fallen stars. The king parried, but guilt slowed him, visions of that blood moon night flashing in his gaze, the choice between pack law and blood tie, duty's inexorable demand. Alara saw it all, the Pathfinder's light piercing his melancholy, revealing the ethical fracture. Vengeance would reclaim his throne, but at what cost to the soul? She intervened, instinct overriding fear, her voice cutting through the din like moonlight on ice. "The ledge! Now!" Thornvald struck true, shattering the frost beneath Grimoire, sending the rival tumbling into the ravine's abyss with a howl that echoed like shattered oaths. Iron Veil faltered, their loyalty cracking, but Silverclaw pressed, Thorn lunging at her with claws extended, his eyes alight with the thrill of erasure. "Rogue whore!" he snarled, breath hot and fetid. "You'll die as you lived, forgotten." Alara dodged, the collar's runes flaring, drawing blood that sizzled on the snow, but Thornvald was there, his body a barrier, felling the beta with a blow that cracked bone and silenced his lies forever. The packs retreated, battered and broken, the pass a graveyard of fur and steel under the moon's indifferent gaze. Panting, Alara sank to her knees, the snow soaking through her shift, cold seeping into wounds old and new. Thornvald knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder, golden eyes shadowed by the weight of what they had wrought. Victory tasted of ash. Grimoire's fall was no clean justice, but a step toward the throne stained by more blood. "You saved me," he murmured, voice thick with unspoken debt, his fingers brushing the collar, gentle against its thorns. The touch ignited the bond, empathy deepening into something perilously close to acceptance. Yet Alara pulled back, the philosophy rising like bile. What is strength, if not choosing forgiveness over the grave's easy mercy? The wind carried the distant weavos of regrouping foes, a reminder that judgment was not ended, only paused. Her past confronted, the traitor slain, but the choice loomed. Bind her fate to his redemption, sacrificing the rogue's freedom for a crown's burdens, or forgive the world's cruelties by walking alone, letting war claim what love might heal. The collar loosened imperceptibly, thorns retracting as if the deusa weighed her soul, the frost-bitten rose's echo whispering of rebirth through moral fire. Thornvald's gaze held hers, melancholy and hopeful, a silent plea for the path where compassion crowned the fallen. In the blood-soaked snow under the fractured moon, Alara felt the dilemma's visceral pull, love as trial, demanding she choose not victory, but the harder grace of union or solitude, where every scar might yet become a scepter. The snow settled like a shroud over the ravaged pass, muffling the echoes of battle until the world held its breath, suspended under the moon's fractured gaze. Alara knelt in the crimson-streaked frost, her body a tapestry of aches, thorns from the collar embedding deeper with each shuddering inhale, blood tracing warm paths down her skin to pool with the fallen. The wind had eased to a whisper, carrying the faint, acrid scent of spilled life and charred fur from where Thornvald's blade had kissed the earth. But the silence rang louder, a spiritual void demanding she fill it with choice. Her vision, the Pathfinder's relentless light, still flickered at the edges of her sight, silver threads weaving through the white desolation, illuminating not just paths of escape, but the crossroads of her soul. Union with this broken king, a sacrifice of her hard-won solitude, or the cure of walking alone, letting his guilt fester into the throne's poison. Thornvald stood over her, his silhouette etched against the moonlit peaks like a statue forged in regret, sword sheathed, but hands stained with the fresh toll of mercy's edge. His golden eyes, dimmed by the melancholy that clung to him like his frayed cloak, searched her face, seeing the war within, the rogue's fierce independence clashing against the Omega's buried yearning to heal. He had slain Grymore not in vengeful fury, but with the ethical precision of a king who weighed every life against the pack's fragile peace. Yet the act had carved deeper into his scar, guilt blooming anew like thorns mirroring hers. "The paths diverge here," he said, voice gravel rough, laced with the philosophy of fallen realms. "But yours lights the way back to mine. Choose, Ilara, not for duty, but for what the Dusa whispers in your blood." She rose slowly, the collar's iron humming against her throat, its runes flaring as if alive to the moment, drawing one final bead of blood that dripped onto the snow, staining it red like the frost-bitten rose she had lost in the ravine. A symbol now etched in her mind, its petals defiant, promising rebirth from rejection's freeze. The air tasted of iron and pine, cold seeping into her lungs with each breath, but warmth stirred from within. The bond they had forged in cave and storm, resisting her rationalizations, no longer. Love was no soft reward, no crown of petals. It was the fire that tempered exile into strength, the choice to bind wounds, not just of flesh, but of spirit. Freedom tempted, a solitary trail vanishing into the mountain's embrace, where she could shed the collar's curse and wander as rogue eternal, unburdened by his throne's shadows. Yet compassion pulled harder, the ethical pull of healing what the world had shattered, his guilt, her invisibility, into something transcendent. The distant Weavos rose again, not in pursuit, but lament, Silverclaw and Ironvale pack scattering like leaves before winter's gale, their leaders felled by the moral blade they had wielded together. Thornvald stepped closer, his hand hovering near the collar, not to claim, but to offer. A gauntlet removed, revealing fingers scarred by old oaths, extended in vulnerability. "I rejected my blood for the pack's survival," he confessed, the words heavy as the snow's weight, his breath clouding between them like unspoken prayers. "But you see the paths I cannot, the mercy in war's ruin. If union is your chain, I release you. If cure is your solitude, I walk it with you as friend, not king." His eyes held the depth of his wound, the fratricide's ghost flickering there, ethical and unyielding, a man who chose compassion over conquest even as it cost him everything. Ilara's heart pounded, visceral and raw, the moon's light spilling over them in silvery waves that turned their bloodied forms ethereal, as if the Dusa bathed them in baptismal frost. The wind stirred her hair, carrying the faint fragrance of that lost rose, icy petals edged in red, a talisman of what rejection could birth. She rationalized no more. Resistance crumbled under the truth of their mirrored breaking. With trembling fingers, she grasped the collar's clasp, the thorns yielding at last, not by force but by will, the iron falling to the snow with a muted thud, runes dulling like dying embers. Blood welled freely now, but it was cleansing, a river of old pain thawing into renewal. She stepped into his space, her hand finding his, their pulses sinking in the chill. A union not of dominance, but equality, where her sight would guide his throne, his strength her rebirth. In that touch, sacrifice and cure entwined. She yielded her rogue's wild freedom for the shared burden of redemption, healing his guilt with the light of her gift, while he offered the coronation of belonging, one word from his lips, mine, turning trial to triumph. The bond ignited fully, instinctive fire blooming in her chest, warm against the winter's bite, their foreheads meeting as breaths mingled, earth and storm, blood and frost. No grand hall awaited, no roaring hearths, just the peaks as witnesses, the moon as seal, huevos, fading into harmonious chorus below. They turned toward the iron veil's distant spires, paths converging under the stars, where power bowed to compassion and every scar became scepter. Yet in the quiet afterglow, Elara felt the spiritual weight settle, not as chain but wings. Love is proof, redemption's flame kindled in the heart of despair. The frost-bitten rose's echo lingered, its red heart unfurling in her soul, a promise that from exile's thorns, queens were crowned. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.